Hey, sir, do you believe in aliens?
For the first time in more than 50 years, Congress held a public hearing on UFOs today.
400 sightings by U.S. Navy pilots that cannot be explained.
Is that UFOs are real, that they're physical objects?
Hey everyone, Coleton here. We are right outside of the Air and Space Museum, right here in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. So last week, the Pentagon released that they have over 400 UFO sightings. And we're going to see if the people of Washington, D.C. think that aliens could run the United States a little better than President Joe Biden can. Have you guys seen anything about the UFO sightings that the Pentagon's released?
No, I have not.
If there are aliens out there, what do you think they're thinking about what's happening in America right now?
I don't know. Everybody's getting criticized stuff for what they do.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture.
Hey, suitcase guy. Did you hear about the Pentagon and the UFOs? So if aliens were to come to the United States and attack us, or an alien walks up and says, "Take me to your leader," do you think Joe Biden would be competent enough to deal with these?
Who knows? He's a good speaker.
Joe Biden's a good speaker.
I don't think he is. I think that there are much more capable leaders. For reference, former President Trump, I think he would have done a lot better job. I think maybe next election cycle, he could do a much better job.
Can I get a let's go, Brandon? If there were aliens, and these UFOs are real, what do you think they're thinking about the state of this world right now?
I think they're probably looking at us thinking, bless them.
As the Southerns would say, bless your heart. Who do you think would best lead discussions with these aliens, if there are any? Do you think Joe Biden's competent?
Well, to answer the second question, no. But I'm saying if there's aliens out there and they're knowing what's going on right now, and we don't even know that they're there, that means that they're so high tech that we got no shot.
I see you. Now you have to answer questions. Stay right there. I can't run. No, get back here. I'm actually captured. This is the alien, and he's capturing me. I'm the translator who take me to the United States' leader. You know who that is?
We don't have one right now.
And you guys are from New Jersey?
Iowa.
I like his glasses.
Hey, do you believe in aliens?
Yeah.
What do you think the aliens are thinking right now, looking at the United States?
I think you're gonna kick my ass.
Something like that. Yeah, I agree.
From a different planet?
These type.
You're the only one I believe.
Gosh. Do you think aliens would do a better job of running this country than Joe Biden?
Unequivocally, absolutely, totally, and positively.
Aaron!
Beep, boop, beep, 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 boop, boop, boop.
Welcome to America Uncanceled. I'm Mercedes Schlapp, and of course, Matt Schlapp is missing in action, but he is in CPAC hungry, and I have, I guess, Larry O'Connor with me.
You don't have to sound so disappointed about it.
Come on, I miss him. I haven't seen Schlapp in 2.5 weeks.
I miss
and
him
he's
too.
gone for another week and a half. I get a little grumpy. What do you want me to do,
What's he
Larry?
bringing you back from Budapest, by the way?
I don't know. He's with one of our daughters who's actually Diana, who's staffing Matt while she's there. So just bring my daughter back.
That's all I ask.
Just
don't
please.
lose our daughter in
Exactly.
Eastern Europe. All right,
exactly,
there you go, Matt.
exactly. But Larry, it's great to have you on the show again.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. I love being on America Uncanceled, and I love it because you have such great, informed guests.
Absolutely.
On a regular basis, including who we're welcoming right now. He is Vivek Ramaswamy, Executive Chair of Strive Asset Management Firm. And I'm sure you're familiar with his book, Woke Inc., and he's got a brand new book coming out this September called Victim of Nations. Vivek, thank you for being with us today.
Good to see you guys. How are you?
I'm great, but I'm confused. I mean, obviously, Well, I am,
confused?
and that's why you're going to answer the questions for me. This is a struggling economy, obviously. We've got companies who are coming out of this devastating pandemic-driven devastation to our economy. And so why is it we've got companies like Disney and Coca-Cola and the major airlines who are just willfully ignoring and repelling half of this country over woke politics? Why are our private corporations suddenly more focused on divisive political ideas instead of actually attracting customers and selling their products and services?
So there's some really complicated reasons behind this, but one of the invisible reasons is that the top shareholders of these companies are concentrated in three firms, really: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Those are the three top shareholders of Disney, for example. They're also among the top shareholders of Disney's competitors, like Paramount Pictures or the upstream owners of NBC Universal, Apple and Microsoft, of Exxon and Chevron, et cetera. The list goes on. And what those firms have been doing for years, Larry, is they have been using their power to tell these companies behind the scenes that we want you to inject yourself into these controversial political or social issues on one side of the debate. And they're using the money of everyday citizens to do it. And so that's been the trend of the last 10 years. It's also been fueled by the fact that we've lived in a Federal Reserve powered temporary economic boom, or at least stock market boom, that's covered up a lot of those sins. I think there's going to be a confluence between those two factors now. There is a market crash ongoing underway, especially in these growth stocks. I, in some ways, predicted this in a chapter from my last book called The ESG Asset Bubble. That was the name of the chapter. The book was published last summer. The prediction was it was coming in the coming years. I didn't know it was going to come this soon. But here's the thing. I actually think this could be good for our corporate culture over the long run, because a lot of this politicization of the private sector has really been an excess, a form of indulgence by these CEOs and the companies and the asset managers who are forcing these ideologies down the throats of these companies. It's been a form of corporate excess with too much liquidity in the system, driven by the Federal Reserve, driven by the US government. Now, as that tide pulls back, having to respond to pressing concerns like inflation, I think it's going to have a side effect of being good for our corporate culture as long as the heavy hand of government doesn't step back in. And that's why actually I'm pretty optimistic when you see companies like Netflix beginning to change course, saying that if you're an employee who doesn't want to work on an offensive project, great, show yourself the door. We're focusing on excellence. I don't love everything Netflix has said over the last 10 years, but I will applaud any company that corrects course. I predict that we're going to see more of that, and that's a big part of why I'm motivated to be part of that change through the asset management industry.
I'm glad you're so optimistic, because then you view these other corporations, a long list of these corporations that are saying basically, if the Roe v. Wade is overruled, we're going to make sure we pay for your abortions, fly you out to a different state. And obviously, they're very engaged still in these political debates. We look at Disney, as you mentioned, in terms of the fact that they themselves, got into these political fights, these gender ideology fights. Can I ask you, who's driving this? And do you think really that you'll see these changes or a reset in some of these companies? I just think that they're so ingrained with so many of these what I would say radically left in top employees who are basically pushing this agenda.
Look, I don't think it's going to happen automatically, Mercedes. I think it's going to take people who are driving that change forward, like what Elon Musk is doing, or I hope will do at Twitter. That hangs in the balance. It's a big part of why I've stepped up to the plate to say that I'm going to do this in sectors across corporate America. Where's the origin story? There's not one origin story. If you had to pick one person at the top of that list, it's probably Larry Fink, who thinks of himself as the emperor of corporate America. He's the CEO of BlackRock, manages over $10 trillion. That's
his name is literally Fink, this guy?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a central casting, Mercedes. That's fantastic.
What he prefers to go by. So I don't think the change is going to happen automatically, Mercedes. But I think that if brave leaders in the private sector are willing to step up, we're kind of a hair's trigger away from a domino effect in the other direction. And I think the recession and I think the stock market decline is actually going to be a tailwind for that cultural change, because people are hungry for something different. You asked, is there going to be a reset? In some ways, the last 10 years has been the reset. That's what they call the Great Reset. And by the way, people criticize that as one of the terms that the right has weaponized. Well, guess what? The Great Reset was named by Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Great Reset is what we've seen play out over the last decade in this country, telling the private sector that it needs to focus on these divisive political ideologies rather than on providing excellent products and services for people who need them. What I think we're going to see now is resetting the Great Reset if enough brave leaders are willing to step up in the private sector to drive that change. And if you ask me, Mercedes, I think that is today maybe even more important than politicians stepping up to the plate to drive political change. Because a lot of these changes, a lot of these problems are seeped into our culture, into our economy, into our private sector, into our educational system. And if you're a politician, look, if you're, as the expression goes, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, all you can do is pass a law. But a lot of these changes in culture have to be driven through market behavior, have to be driven through the choices that everyday citizens make in the workplace, in the places where they invest, and where they buy their products. That's what I predict we're going to see in the next 10 years, starting potentially in the next few
Vivek,
months.
one of the things we love to sort of do here at CPAC Land is empower the individuals, right? We're all about, let's not just complain about it and whine about it. What can we do about it? So, everything you're talking about has to do with these giant asset firms and these huge investments that are moving piles of money. What can the consumer do? What can the individual American do to send a signal to these companies that listen, we're still the customer here, and we'd like to think that we have a say?
And the good news is I think that the customers who fit this description are not only a majority of the American consumers, it's a majority of American consumers with real buying power, with real investment power. And here's what I say is, first piece of advice is, from a cultural perspective, piece of advice is, we don't need to politicize this. The goal is actually we want to depoliticize the private sector. So do I want a red economy and a blue economy? No, I don't. I think that if we get to red baseball and blue baseball, like we got to red pillows and blue pillows, I think that's actually pretty dangerous for the American experiment, because I love a private sector that can bring us together, whether we're black, white, red, or blue. That's a good thing. But we're not starting from neutral territory. And I think that there are opportunities for entrepreneurs in one sector after another to step up and tell the American consumer, the American investor, the American worker, that your voice can be heard. It is your money that BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and firms like these are investing on your behalf, advocating in corporate America for policies that would make your own blood boil if you actually knew what was going on. So who's directing your money to them? It's state treasurers, it's pension fund boards, it's 401k account managers, it's potentially investment advisors across this country. This is a time for education, for understanding, just like last year was a big year of education for a lot of parents across this country about what was happening to your kids. Now, I think that, if that was one good effect of the pandemic, I think that it shined a lot of transparency for parents to say that these are actually my kids. These are not kids of the state that are indoctrinated in ideologies that I don't believe, at least in an age-appropriate way, they're ready to be indoctrinated in. Now the next question is to say that it's actually my buying power. It's actually my capital. It's actually my hard work of earnings and savings and investments that better not be weaponized back against me to say that I'm going to volunteer for a cause or I'm going to donate to some philanthropic agenda through one hand, and to use my own savings and investment portfolios back against me to undo the work that I care about in my community and in my country. That's something I'm going to learn more about, and that's power that I'm going to reclaim back for myself in a positive way. Not to say that I want to create a red economy in parallel, but I want to create an economy that's centered on providing excellence in the products and services that I get as a consumer, and that's what companies should be focused on.
How about a green economy?
And
not red or blue. Green. Let's talk
that?
about money.
Well, the green then would be, green money. I was thinking more
of
of the
no,
environment, but
not
maybe
the
we'll do a different color.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. Let me ask you a question, because let's take a step back. So obviously you've worked in corporate America. You understand the changes that have happened in these private companies. What made you say, I've got to step up, I need to be a voice in this process, and then move forward and build out this asset management firm that you all are looking forward to, making sure that Americans can have access to? What prompted you to do this? And I do believe that there is what I call the alternative economy, where these consumers do not, there is a market for this. These consumers don't want politics in every aspect of their lives, especially on a financial sense.
And I predict what's going to happen there, Mercedes, is that companies like Nike and Airbnb and BlackRock, once they have millions of customers leave their ranks, will wake up 5 years from now and say that, you know what, our approach to diversity and inclusion wasn't as diverse and inclusive as we thought it was. We're going to change course. That's how we get the culture back, through market competition. And I'm on your side of that equation. Now, for me personally, this was a journey. It was a journey. I did not expect that this was where I was going to land, right? I was a biotech CEO. Before that was years as a biotech investor, trained in science at Harvard before that, went to Yale Law School along the way. And why do I mention those things? It's because, though I wasn't born into elite America, look, I have lived it for the last years. Okay, I have seen how the game is played. It's pretty comfortable to be able to fly in a private jet to a fancy ski town to muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change and then pat yourself on the back for doing it. It's not a bad life. But the thing I grew worried about was that this new philosophy was actually tearing apart the country at its seams by feeding and preying on the divisions of identity politics and partisan politics for a small group of corporatocratic monarchs. I do think they operate like monarchs in the United States, to aggregate power for themselves at the expense of appearing to care about social justice in a way that was really dividing everybody else. And I couldn't remember a time in my life, Mercedes, where there was a greater difference between what people were willing to say in private and what people were willing to say in public. And that went for many of my fellow CEOs and investors too. And I thought that was an indictment of the health of American democracy, and that somebody who had had the experience from the inside of so-called elite America needed to start talking openly again. That's what set me on this journey a couple of years ago. I never imagined that I'd be doing the exact thing I'm doing now back then. There was no agenda to it other than to shine a spotlight on it with a couple of books and the national travel I've been doing. But I figured that rather than just talking about the issue, now came the time to actually do something about it as well. So I'm wearing my entrepreneurial hat once again.
So you bring up a great point, and I will say just here in the swamp, what's been interesting to watch is that Republicans actually are really disgusted by where corporate America has headed. And there's been a bit of a separation between corporate America and Republicans, which is, I think, the first time we've seen this in a long time. So really, corporate America has lost a lot of political friends on both sides.
No doubt about it. And I think that this new, what I called in my last book, the industrial complex, this marriage between government power and corporate power, actually managed to do both sides into submission, right? The old left used to be skeptical of corporate power, like Silicon Valley. They used to actually be threatened by the old left. And so what they realized was that actually we can use our corporate power agenda as a way of deflecting the accountability and the threats to our monopoly power. That was kind of this arranged marriage. It was not a marriage of love. It's more like, as I've called it before, it's more like mutual prostitution. But the interesting thing is they also managed to dupe the right, where they tricked the right into saying that the free market can do no wrong. Don't you remember the slogans you memorized back in 1980? That's what your inner conscience says, without recognizing that that free market does not exist today when it's not the invisible hand of the market, but the invisible fist of government that's actually guiding the behaviors of many of these companies, from the technology industry to the asset management industry. And so both sides in some ways were played by this new force in American life that was neither government nor corporate power, but a hybrid of the two that was a monster that even our founding fathers, I think, did not envision to the extent that it exists today. That being said, we've talked about it for a couple of years now. I think that, especially with the economic tide receding a little bit, the everyday Americans across this country, including people beyond the right, everyday Americans who are apolitical in many ways, even people who used to be on the center left, are hungry for something new. And I think companies are going to have to wake up to that reality. Some of them are starting to. One of my goals and missions is to actually speak out as a shareholder to make it very clear on behalf of everyday Americans that this is the direction that companies need to head in the next decade, not musing about capital D diversity, but reviving the few things that bind us together through our economy, like the unapologetic pursuit of excellence itself. That's part of what can actually bring us together through American capitalism.
Well, that's great. And as we've had a shrinking economy and it's teetering on the brink of recession now, it's good to see that as we start to put the pieces together and start to move forward, hopefully with the new Republican-led Congress coming up next year, that as the economy starts to recover, we'll have people like Vivek Ramaswamy with Strive Asset Management Firm actually doing it the right way and giving us all a chance to actually be a part of this economy, despite the political divisiveness we see in Washington, D.C. Vivek, thank you so much for being here today.
We want him to come back.
Yeah,
just stay with us. We're going to be right back.
Oh, do we have more?
We do, because I want to talk about
got
potential recession and
all right,
inflation and
good.
stuff like that.
He did mention mutual prostitution, though. Why is he why are you dragging Bill Clinton into this?
Stop it.
What did he ever do?
We'll be right back.
All right. Welcome back, and I just want to be clear. He was saying red economy, blue economy. When I say green economy, it's going to make me sound like I'm AOC or something.
You are so AOC.
Not an environmental green.
Seriously.
I mean green money.
Climate change
money.
green.
All right, we're back. It's at America Uncanceled here I'm Larry O'Connor. That's Mercedes Schlepp. And joining us, continuing with us, is Vivek Ramaswamy.
You almost like tried to get him off the show. I was like, I need him.
We're done with you, Vivek.
Questions.
Stop hogging my time.
Exactly.
He is the author of Woke Inc. and Victims of Nation, coming up this September.
That was a lot.
I just said we're on the brink of a recession. We really are, right? I mean, the actual classic definition of a recession, Vivek, with two back-to-back quarters of a shrinking economy. This is it. This is the Biden recession.
Yeah, look, I think that it's a very tough spot for the economy right now, where there's a double whammy that's kind of come to a head. And the double whammy is this, is that inflation is now at runaway levels. And so the Federal Reserve has to tighten monetary policy. The last time we were in this situation, though, was, in the late 70s and early 80s, when Volcker was tightening monetary policy back then. At least you had a government deregulatory agenda that was stimulating the underlying businesses in a real way, in ultimately unshackling American business from the shackles of regulation. Here we have a double whammy, where the administration here, through its policy agenda, is a less business-friendly environment. At the same time, the Federal Reserve is tightening. I think that is a recipe for economic decline. It is a recipe that spells for not only stock market declines, but also this recession that I think we're entering right now. And I think that's going to be difficult. But I think that part of this is the medicine, hopefully, culturally speaking, that comes from the excesses of the last couple of years, where, I don't mean to be, dramatic about this, but it's like, hey, a bunch of cocaine addicts. That's kind of the analogy that I give to what the Federal Reserve and to a market that has become addicted to Federal Reserve and centrally printed dollars. This is a form of disciplining that has been long overdue for the last half decade or longer in American life, certainly over the last couple of years since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that this could be a disciplining force for our culture. I actually talk about this in my upcoming book. I had written the segment of the book even before the recent market crash, predicting that I don't want to see governments do what they did back in 2008, bailing out selective favorites. There will be companies that do not last this pullback in the economic tide, that do not last this recession. It's, as Joseph Schumpeter called it, it is part of the process of creative destruction. That is part of capitalism working. And I hope that it's allowed to work to be able to weed out some of these excesses of corporate behaviors, including the political behaviors we were talking about in the last segment, but other behaviors too, that if we allow it, this economic crash, and I think it could be a crash, could actually be good for American culture if we allow ourselves to build fortitude around it and not view ourselves as victims of hardship, but allow us to say that that hardship allows us to rediscover who we really are as a people.
Vivek,
that's what I'm hoping for.
Can I just, here's my question though. I mean, it is hardship. American families are struggling. The Democrats' approach has been, let's keep spending to try to, help ease the issue. But the reality is like these American families, they can't go through these hardships. It's like too much. They can barely make it paycheck to paycheck. Now we're dealing with the baby formula shortage, which is impacting so many families who are very stressed out about how they're going to feed their infants and their toddlers. I mean, so it's really easy for us to say, okay, well, there's hardships coming and there could be a crash. But how can a family, an American family, be able to survive these hardships? What should they be planning for?
So look, I think that this is a government-created problem over the last couple. Unfortunately, the American people are left holding the bag, and I sympathize with everyone who's going to have to suffer a consequence in the coming years that were made for you by your policymakers, made for you by the Federal Reserve, made for you by a corporate class that has abandoned the pursuit of excellence for these other agendas that they're pushing on you. That being said, we have to resist the temptation to say that it's just going to be another period of doubling down on that mistake by using fiscal stimulus or government handouts or checks sent around the country that are going to worsen the problem. Though I predict that the discussion at some point is going to go in that direction. We're going to have to hold the line and recognize that the right answer is unleashing again the power of true American enterprise to lift people up without government interference. A deregulatory agenda that's an agenda that stops government directing companies to do what government wants it to do, using threats and inducements and government money to be able to use it as a string attached to drive private enterprises to do what government wants it to do, to instead have a market that's truly separate from the state. That's what's going to allow us to best lift people up. But I don't, if I'm just speaking really candidly, Mercedes, I think that there is unfortunately, in the next year to 2 years, there will be some periods of economic hardship that are the unavoidable consequence of bad policies and bad behavior by the leadership class in this country. It pains me to know that everyday Americans are going to have to, encounter some of that hardship. But at the end of the day, that is the price paid by bad policies. But at the end of the day, let's use that as a wake-up call to at least implement the right policies such that we're in better footing for the long run that allows the private sector to be the private sector without government interference and to actually serve everyday Americans rather than serving these agendas that have co-opted these companies, starting from the government top down.
Can I jump in here too? Also, what's your analysis on potential food shortages? Obviously, we've seen instability coming because of the Russia invasion of Ukraine, obviously supply chain issues because of the Chinese lockdown, because of their stringent lockdowns in that country. Do you foresee that we could be experiencing some of these food shortages that, I know I've been reading about?
Yeah. So I think food shortages could be a major problem around the world, especially because some of the regions in Russia that are at risk right now are some of the big providers of food around the world. I'm hopeful that food shortages won't affect America quite as much because we're really fortunate to have the center of this country, like geographically the center of this country, which is one of the big food production centers for exports that actually serve other parts of the world as well. So it's my hope that at least on the food side, though India and China and countries in Asia might be affected by the regions of Russia, Ukraine that otherwise would have exported food that no longer can, I think on the food side, I'm more optimistic. However, I also think that this is a wake-up call for leaders of industry in the United States who for years have said that onshoring efforts or bringing full supply chain independence in the United States was something that these protectionists were talking about, but the true free marketeers who really understand the market understand that we live in a globally interlinked economy. Well, guess what? I think they have realized that it is in their self-interest to make sure that their supply chains are secured, because imagine in these times of product shortages and service shortages, if firms could actually step up to the plate, people could actually make good money doing that. It could be a competitive advantage. And so I think many of these companies are going to start waking up to the fact that the old dogmas that they memorized back in 1990 don't really apply today. And in fact, the biggest shoe to drop hasn't dropped yet. I predict it's going to happen before the next U.S. president takes office in November 2024. That is China invading Taiwan.
Wow.
This is the big shoe yet to drop. And you want to talk about supply chain shortages? For the semiconductor industry and other industries that the world depends on Taiwan for, we haven't even seen the half of it yet if that China invades Taiwan. This is the moment for American industry to wake up and say, if Russia could invade Ukraine and cause this type of disruptions around the world, let's wake up to the fact that we have been going in the wrong direction for the last 20 years. And onshoring isn't just a political priority or a nationalist agenda or something, whatever you want to label it. It is an economic agenda that's in the self-interest of not only companies, but companies in their ability to serve consumers that will be a competitive advantage. And so it's the America First agenda is not just a policy agenda. It is actually an important part of a commercial agenda that companies can seize onto. And so I hope that companies start to wake up to that. I'm certainly going to be a voice to a lot of corporate America, guiding them in that direction. But I think that many of them, the facts are too plain for them not to see that. Hopefully we don't encounter some of the disaster scenarios if those corporate leaders start waking up to the opportunity, frankly, that they could take advantage of if they shore up their supply chains here in the United States.
Such critically important stuff, and thank you so much. Don't be a stranger, Vivek Ramaswamy, Strive Asset Management Firm. There's so much more to discuss, but we're out of time right now.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for your insight.
That was great. First it was the prostitution thing with Bill Clinton, then
but
showering cocaine.
I don't think I'm going to forget those. That was fascinating. We're addicted to.
Oh, that's what the showering cocaine. I thought he was bringing up Johnny Depp and dragging him into it. It's like, hasn't he been through enough?
I thought it was fascinating, really, truly fascinating insight altogether on how the American families are going to be able to survive these difficult times that we're facing. Yeah. But this is why it's critical to know what's coming, right?
Yes.
To be prepared.
And we need leadership. We need leadership.
Yeah.
Yes, we talk about Washington and politics a lot, and certainly at our states, but we need leadership in the private sector as well. Point. And we don't want a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or liberal economy. We just want an apolitical, functioning economy that serves all Americans and delivers goods and services to us, because that's what we expect. And they've fallen down.
Because we got to stop woke or we're going to go broke.
That's right.
Okay, that's all I've
rhymes.
got. Didn't that rhyme?
It's very
impressive. I know. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Larry, thanks for being my co-host.
Thanks for having me
and I'm going to need you for a few more days. We'll talk about that after the show. And remember to follow us on all the social media channels at mschlapp, at Mercedes Schlapp,
At Larry O'Connor,
and at CPAC. And we have so much going on. Of course, we're going to keep you updated with what's happening at CPAC Hungary and wrapping that conference up. And we'll get some really good intel from Matt Schlapp soon enough. Thanks so much and have a great night.